So hi everyone, my name is Anthony Kaufman. I am a senior programmer at the Chicago International Film Festival, and I also run our Industry Days program. We're very excited to be presenting this second Indie Film Town Hall with the Independent Film Alliance Chicago. Thank you to Angie Gaffney and her organization for helping us put this together. Angie, I don't know how many of you out there saw the first one, but Angie moderated that one, and she'll be back to moderate a third Indie Film Town Hall in 2 weeks from today at the same time from noon to 1 p.m. And at that third Indie Film Town Hall, we will have heads of SAG and IATSE to discuss some production stuff, as well as I think Christine Dudley may be joining us again from the Independent Producers Alliance, and we'll also have someone from Champaign, Illinois, head of film. They may be out of the gate first before Chicago, so we'll see in terms of actual production. So the way this will go is everyone will introduce themselves if those of you don't already know who we have here, our illustrious guests. We'll ask some questions to begin with, and then those of you out there, we want to hear from you. This is about the community. Please ask your questions to the chat. I do have a bunch of pre-approved questions that we received, and a lot of the questions are about some of the same stuff. So I think we're all kind of on the same page. So let's get started with some introductions. We can, oh, we already have some hands being raised. Yeah, let's start with the introductions. Please tell us, first off, guys, obviously who you are, the organization that you're here to represent, and just very briefly, what your organization is focused on doing now while we are still ostensibly confined to our homes and our, small groups of family members and people. So Mary, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Kay Cook. I'm the president of the Advisory Council of the Midwest Film Festival, and happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us. Our organization is the nation's only film festival that is solely dedicated to the Midwest independent filmmaker, and so we showcase and celebrate regionally produced cinema. Unfortunately, one of the main best things about our organization is the gathering together, which we obviously can't do at all right now. And hopefully, as we move forward and as the city and state begin to open up, we'll be able to gather again. In the meantime, our organization, our board is still meeting. We're still trying to figure out the best ways to pivot to help strengthen and support our independent filmmaking community. As of right now, our comedic shorts night that we kicked off earlier this year with our film fair, that content is currently available through the end of the month for free. If you want to check it out, go to midwestfilm.com and enjoy some comedic shorts over the weekend before they all go away at the end of the month.
Okay. All right. Aymar, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Aymar Jean-Christian. I am the co-founder and head of research and development for OTV, Open Television. We are an online distribution platform for short form content by historically marginalized communities, primarily, almost exclusively in Chicago. And we have actually been more active because we are an online platform in the post-COVID context. So we were already going to offer a suite of courses called OTV Study Hall, where creators can get sort of a crash course in everything from pitching yourself in your project, screenwriting, production, marketing, grant writing, investing, and how to break into the industry. And the pandemic has actually allowed us to expand those courses. They were going to be limited to 25 to 50 people when we held them in space, but we opened them up. So we now have pretty much over 100 people every week on Zoom taking those classes, and they're really exciting, and people are actually loving them and finding them very restorative. We did have a bunch of screenings planned at like the MCA, Chicago Cultural Center, for May. We moved those to live streams on Facebook and Vimeo, which has allowed us to expand our audience. And we were always going to expand our distribution beyond desktop to have our own branded apps. And we doubled down and are now doing mobile and TV apps that will soft launch next month. We'll have like a queer film festival, queer performance festival at the end of June called For the Culture Fest. They'll be streaming on our new website, and then the branded apps will launch in August. So we're feeling really energized actually in this context. Production hasn't happened, so no one has been shooting, but we do imagine phase 3 might change that. So we're gonna probably issue some guidelines tomorrow, actually.
Great. Great. Okay, Jason.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Matsumoto. I'm the co-founder and typically the director of operations at Full Spectrum Features, although right now I think many of you know Eugene Park. He's on sabbatical taking care of his newborn baby. So I'm currently acting as the interim executive director for the organization. Full Spectrum Features, we are committed and dedicated to driving equity into the independent film industry by producing and supporting and distributing the work of women, people of color, and LGBTQ+ filmmakers. I think similar to Aymar, it's been kind of this balance between trying to figure out which of our programs we want to like aggressively push and pivot to virtual. That happens mostly in kind of our distribution bucket. Fortunately, we launched the Producers Lab right around the time that the pandemic began, and we were able to pivot that, in partnership with DK and Kwame and the City Film Office to a virtual setting, and we're going to keep on doing that. So that's been like a really great outlet to continue programming. We also, our flagship series, Chicagoland Shorts, we also, pivoted that from an in-person premiere to a virtual premiere, and learned a lot about how to basically run a TV show, like a live TV show with a very small staff. It's been pretty fun, and a lot of, late night eBay buying of different, hardware tools that we need to push things to different computers. We're also trying, I think, our general approach had been, to bring people together around film, to have important conversations that these films bring up. And so VOD and stuff like this was on our timeline, maybe a year or a year and a half out from right now, but clearly that shifted, and we're going to be launching Holy Trinity on June 16th, our first on our own VOD platform. So we're doing a lot of kind of planning and building like a digital marketing team to support that effort, which, I think in the same way that Aymar mentioned, like there's some energy. I think what the hardest part for us right now is balancing, what's happening today, taking care of our staff, and, really thinking about how we restructure our day so that there's moments of times that people can share how they're feeling, but also be pushing things towards pivoting virtually. So it's kind of this constant balance that I think is very difficult to strike right now. But we're trying to be honest about those things and stay positive.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason. Jolene.
Hi, thank you so much for having us be part of this. My name's Jolene Pinder. I'm the executive director of Kartemquin Films. We're a nonprofit here in Chicago, been around for 54 years, and we support independent Midwestern filmmakers and communities to create impactful documentaries that foster a more ethical and democratic society. So, and I just want to start out by saying too, I know many folks on this call know that Kartemquin, our founder, had COVID-19, has made a really incredible recovery and is doing really well. But I just want to express my gratitude to you all for all the sort of healing energy and positivity that people sent to us. It was a really tough part of just a tough moment for us, and it really helped to have so many people in this community supporting. So in terms of like what we're doing as an organization, we were able to move a lot of our programs pretty quickly online, like our Diverse Voices and Docs, which is a monthly fellowship program for filmmakers of color throughout the Midwest. Means they, we have some folks in other cities who can't be traveling to be in community, but we've been able to do everything online with some modifications, and it's worked pretty well. We have also been sort of like talking to our community, surveying them to kind of get an understanding of what are the best supports that we can offer. So coming out of that, one of the things that we found with both we have an alumni community of about 500, and then we have a number of co-producing films as well, was that people were really hungry for that community to come together and to have safe spaces to talk about the issues that they were facing, whether it be production, fundraising, distribution. So we've done some online virtual workshops in this Zoom environment where we've talked about those issues, brought in funders like Lauren Papps from MacArthur and Carrie Lozano from the International Documentary Association to have really candid conversations about where people are at. We have and we're planning to continue that. We have also sort of taken a pretty critical look at our grant making efforts for this year and moved it more into emergency offerings. So with our Diverse Voices and Docs program, our current fellows, we're doing emergency grants that aren't production related and that are immediate. And we're looking to do some more emergency grant funding for our larger community with the real focus on POC makers and folks that are underrepresented in the field, because we're just finding more and more in the documentary space that this pandemic has just highlighted the how vulnerable our documentary space is, and especially for makers of color in the community. So, and then I think the last thing I would say is we're sort of looking about how we can better serve the educational marketplace. Kartemquin has a lot of films from its 54 years, a large catalog of around 70 films. And we're looking at, we were already sort of thinking about having an online platform that would be specifically Kartemquin branded. And we're looking at launching that sooner and being able to connect filmmakers to teachers and professors who need more content in their classrooms, and how we could do that more nimbly and quickly.
Okay, thanks. All right, Kwame, last but not least. Oh, wait. Mute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm off mute now. Hello, everybody. I'm Kwame Amoaku. I'm the director of the Chicago Film Office. We have been teleworking since mid-April, so the office has remained open during this time. At present, we are working with the mayor's larger D-Case initiative to issue guidelines for reopening for the arts community, and we're a part of that effort right now. So we're now assembling guidelines for production in the city and having those reviewed by the health department, and hopefully we'll be able to post those soon. Our goal is to achieve a limited permitting level in phase 3, where we would work with crews of under 10 or less. Right now, that's our plan. None of that's been necessarily approved by the health department, but we're working with the health department, the mayor's office, and the governor's office to figure those things out right now. We're also moving to take our programming efforts virtual. We have a number of webinars and master classes coming up soon that we'll offer on a virtual platform. And just overall, we're working with the city to lure more production here when this is over. Mainly, there's a huge backlog of production, and we feel like Chicago should take a substantial amount of that. So just making efforts to actively market towards studios and large production entities to consider Chicago as a place to relocate large-scale production, as opposed to, say, at Georgia or another third area market.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, that's basically what we're up to.
So most of the questions that I think are on people's minds are, you know, how do we get back to work? When do we get back to work? What does getting back to work look like and feel like and cost? So obviously we can't answer all of those now, but I think that maybe to elaborate, Kwame, can you explain a bit on what the discussions are like in terms of how and when production does return? What does phase 3 production look like? And for those of you who don't know, phase 3 in all of Illinois opens up basically this weekend. Chicago will come a little bit later, but that's phase 3. And then phase 4, when, you know, the city and the state starts to meet the you know, better thresholds for the virus, there's even increased opening up. So can you give us a little more sense of what those steps look like?
At this point, we're still formulating those guidelines, but they resemble guidelines that have been released in other cities and by other entities. The AICP has issued some guidelines. There's a draft of the so-called white paper that's from the Hollywood industry that's out right now. Oregon, Kansas City, a lot of cities have released guidelines, and ours kind of mirror a lot of those at this point, requiring social distancing. Phase 3, we are looking at classifying film as non-essential manufacturing. So a lot of those same rules would apply for filmmaking. We're also looking at permitting crews of 10 or less in phase 3. Exteriors, interior work would be governed by the same rules that govern non-essential manufacturing, where generally there's a breakdown of 5 people to every 1,000 square foot in a studio space. So these are all things that are tentative right now that we're working on, and we're taking a lot of input from CDC, Chicago Department of Public Health, unions and guilds. It's still a cake that's being baked right now.
Yeah, right. And in phase 4, you know, the requirements are, you know, I guess 50 people or less is what I've been seeing. Would that, as far as what you know now, and I realize this will change, this could very well change, but as far as you know, would that apply to film shoots as well?
Yeah, in phase 4, we're hoping to move to larger crews of 50 or less.
Oh.
Spacing crews in 50 groups of 50 in different sections of the studio and that kind of thing. We're exploring all that kind of stuff right now.
So I might want I'd like to maybe extend this to like different areas, and we had questions about shorts specifically, we had questions about features specifically, we had questions about, you know, docs specifically. I'm wondering if, you know, Jolene, Jason, Aymar, and Mary, you're also a film producer. I'm wondering what you've read and seen already out there in terms of white papers and plans is affecting, you know, how you're approaching production when you open up. You know, are there specific things that you're already planning on based on what's out there? Jolene, docs?
Sure. So, you know, we, the Doc Society Field Division and Sundance Institute issued some guidelines a few weeks ago. It's sort of a work in progress. I mean, and, you know, that's more suited for the documentary field. I feel like it wasn't entirely suited to the kinds of really independent filmmakers that we're working with, often emerging filmmakers that don't really have the kinds of supports that sort of infrastructure seem to be better equipped for. I mean, you know, it's really hard because right now there's so much that's unknown. I mean, we're not really encouraging active production. And we were actually at a moment, you know, this year we had around 5 co-production films that were coming out on the circuit. And we had a couple that were set to premiere at South by Southwest. So it was a really heavy distribution year for us,
Okay.
and not as much a production year. But, you know, we're trying to sort of really be part of these conversations around the ethical considerations around production in this time. And Gordon was just part of a conversation that the Documentary Producers Alliance did earlier this week, because I think there's a lot that you have to consider about the ethical considerations of entering into production, given the number of unknowns. And documentary can be a really intimate sort of craft. So maintaining that social distance can be a real challenge. So we haven't issued any guidelines ourselves. We've been reading and reviewing and being part of these conversations, but there's just a lot unknown, you know, and we don't have any really active productions right now outside of Gordon is making a film about his own experience with COVID, and we have some folks that are working on some archival projects, and that's, you know, much safer, and some projects that are in post.
Right. Jason, Aymar, or Mary, I mean, do you know of people making shorts or wanting to make shorts now, you know, right now? Like what are you telling people? Are you telling people, you know, maybe you need to wait, you just still need to just hold off until, you know, things are a little more settled? I'm wondering, you know, what's the approach right now?
We are telling people to wait until phase 4, at least until we get more guidance from the city, and also we know more about testing. However, many of our productions already before this were made in the range of where there's typically around 10 to 20 people on set. So we imagine that there are people who will try it. Just because we are a distribution company, we don't produce, so we can't tell them no officially. We can't stop them from doing it. We had 3 series, 3 highly anticipated series that had to stop production when the shelter-in-place order was in place, and I know that they've been angling to get back. So we're issuing our guidelines kind of like, almost like, you know, the safe sex guidelines. It's like, if you're gonna do it, be safe kind of thing. Even though we're telling you not to, we can't control you. And so we've been following probably a lot of the things that Kwame's reading, some of the industry guidelines that have been released, CDC, OSHA. We're linking to all of those and issuing our own about, obviously, masks, sanitation. We're encouraging people to shoot outside if you're going to shoot at all, because our artists don't shoot on large sound stages typically. They shoot in apartments and smaller intimate spaces where transmission is even more likely to happen, even if you do have just a small number of people. We're hoping to be able to provide PPE. We're writing grants so we can buy PPE to give to our artists if they desperately need it in an emergency. But officially we're saying, no, let's wait until we know more. We also have remote shooting guidelines that are things you can do just in your home. We had one creator who shot, it was a crowdfunding video, but it was also kind of like an episode of like a vlog-based series that was kind of like telling stories, you know, so you just sort of narrate a story and then you use stock footage, animation, pre-existing footage to kind of make it a little bit more interesting and jazzy in post-production. So because our works are a little bit more experimental, we do imagine there are people who can do a lot alone just from their home.
I'll speak to the indie feature side. Obviously, no production is happening now, nor do I know of anybody who is actively trying to film right now. I mean, there's lots of development going on right now. There's lots of, when we're ready, then we will do ABC. And I think a lot of that guidance is obviously going to come from the white paper, from the IATSE and, you know, Teamsters and those guilds and Screen Actors Guild. Currently, some of you may know that if you're going to be using one of the SAG-AFTRA low budget contracts, SAG-AFTRA sent out a press release and a notice to all members that, you know, they were not to accept employment during this time until they've reached out to SAG-AFTRA and gotten approval to move forward. And so it does appear that there are going to be guidelines that will be shared with individual productions as far as like what that looks like, and what sort of what each production is going to have specific to its locations and all of those other details. So we're just, we're in a kind of holding pattern right now of like wait and see. But I think our industry leaders are doing it correctly. That it's like we are all impatient to get back to work, but safety is the most important thing. And especially on film production sets, we always say safety is the most important. And so we really only have one chance to get this right. And so we want to make sure that it's done properly and thoughtfully. And so I think, we're taking a scientific data-based approach and following the guidance of our governor and our mayor. I think that they're doing a wonderful job, certainly understanding that everybody wants to reopen and wants to get back to work. But for the time being, I would just say, do what you can with the tools that you have safely in your apartment.
Yeah, good time for development, what we said last week. It's good time for writing and development.
Yes.
Jason, anything else to add about this?
I think that was well covered. I'll just say that, I think to Amar's point about productions that can happen in a more creative way, we're working with a producer in Japan who's on a project that's, the short title is State of Emergency, and what we've done is they've kind of curated about 18 different artists and filmmakers across the world in different time zones, and they're writing a script that can basically be shot through, it's like partially scripted, but also kind of leans on the actors and their ability to just kind of, create. So like, there's a framework around it, but they're going to try to figure out how to create that into like a 90-minute or potentially a feature. And that's been a really interesting development process that has potential for production, during this time, and it's like quite relevant. So I thought that was an interesting approach, and we've been excited to see if it can actually happen.
So thanks, Jason.
If folks are looking for inspiration, I would recommend people head onto Twitch and follow all of the many drag queens that have gone onto Twitch. And, because all the bars are closed, they have no income. And so they've really figured out how to do really creative stuff just like in their homes. A lot of use of projection, green screen obviously is very popular, but I've watched 2-3 hours of drag, solo produced works that are pretty engaging.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, one thing I would add about from the documentary space too is that like a lot of folks are working one-on-one with their participants for them to self-film and get them equipment to be able to kind of safely film their own stories. And I think that there's a lot of interesting potential there, and also a lot of ethical questions to be raised about how participants are engaged in the process, and if if they're taking on that amount of kind of labor within the production process, how they're compensated for that labor. But it's certainly something that we've seen people pivoting to.
So we're starting to get some questions from people, and I'll bring in some of these voices. Just so everyone knows that in the chat box, we've included links to all their organizations. I know there's some people interested in following up, Aymar, with what you're doing in these classes, which sounds great. So yeah, if you look in the chat, that all of their websites are there. There was a question about the Chicago International Film Festival, and I might as well get that out of the way, as well as we talk about Midwest Film Fest as well moving forward. And I'll just say very quickly that, like all of exhibition in Chicago, there's a lot of exciting things that people are exploring. By October, there'll probably be even more options on the table. But I mean, the Chicago International Festival is definitely moving forward, and we're looking forward to exploring all options. And that could include live events. Mary, what's your thoughts for Midwest?
Well, certainly we've had to postpone our last event from April. We were looking forward to beginning our residency at the Gene Siskel Film Center, and that was at the end of April. We were going to have Female Filmmakers Night, which is one of our most popular screening events. And unfortunately, even though that lineup is ready to go, we've decided to, follow the guidelines of the city, and certainly the Gene Siskel is not open currently. And so our board has decided to postpone those events for the time being. The next one that was supposed to happen June 16th was Indian Union Passion Projects, another short film night. That would be our first one. And, again, we're going to wait and see what the guidelines from the city and the state say. In the meantime, as I shared earlier, we've got our comedic shorts night from our film fair and comedy shorts night that kicked off our 2020 season is still available online free of charge through the end of the month. And then, as far as additional programming, submissions are still open. We have AdCom shorts coming up, and we also have a music video night. So submissions are still open. And I think it's kind of like we're in a holding pattern of wait and see, and let's be responsible and thoughtful about how we're going to curate this moving forward. But the good news is that, especially for all those filmmakers who are selected for Female Filmmakers Night and all the rest moving forward, is that we're just postponing. We're not shutting down, and we're going to continue to be here and be a support for the independent filmmaking community. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, we obviously no one knows, but hopefully by the fall, at the very least, 50-person gatherings will be allowed. So that I mean, from nothing, that sounds pretty great. We should be able to accomplish a lot with that. So, so there's a question here from Jamie. I think it's an important one. I don't know if anyone really has the answer to it, but Jamie, I've accessed you and made you live if you wanted to ask your question. Let me see if this works. Jamie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Hold on one sec. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, great. Hey, nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm in Los Angeles and work a lot on indie films, and obviously all the productions are on hold here. So what I've been hearing from all my filmmaker friends is that one of the main barriers to starting productions back up is the film insurance agencies. And I was just wondering if you had any insights on what the status of is getting film insurance going.
Thanks, Jamie. Anyone have any ideas?
I mean, I'll address that as best I can. So I share your concerns as an indie film producer as well. Certainly, we've learned from a general liability standpoint that COVID or any other pandemic airborne illness will not be covered through your general production liability insurance, which is a problem. And it does appear that there's at least some traction on the national level to get some sort of relief fund going from the government to sort of bridge that gap. How successful those efforts will be remains to be seen. I was, as we all are, on Zoom meetings all the time, and I was on one that was really interesting to me because there was a representative from CAPS there, and CAPS, for those of you that don't know, is a payroll production company, and they often are the employer of record for signatory status, and they take care of handling cast and crew payments. So there was a representative from CAPS there, and then there was on this webinar about insurance, production insurance, and there was also a workers' comp attorney who represents employees. on the call. And they were talking specific to California, but this might apply to you since you're in California. And I'm not sure how it varies state to state, but they were saying that in the event that an employee contacted COVID, let's say, and was able to trace it back to getting it in the workplace, that their personal medical expenses would be covered under a workers' comp insurance claim and would be paid out that way. Now, that doesn't cover production shutting down and quarantine and all of those other additional associated costs, but I found it very interesting because it was the first time I had ever heard anything like that, that should an employee or a film crew member or cast member contract the disease and it's traceable back to the workplace, that those personal medical costs would be covered through a workers' comp claim.
Right. Kwame, I'm just kind of wondering, that is, the question is really like, nothing can move forward till insurance is worked out. Are you hearing anything through the grapevine?
Other than it's a problem, no. I mean, I've heard a lot of obstacles to it, and as Mary Kay explained, the solution for the individual crew members' medical expenses, I've seen that kind of been worked out. But as far as, I know that Congress is actively working to limit the liability of all corporations during this time. And I believe that whatever general framework exists for liability on a corporate level for COVID is what's going to govern the industry as well. That's just my own personal feeling. I think that the same liability for any other workplace for COVID is going to apply to production space as well. So I think it's just a matter of waiting to see how that turns out, and it can't be to the point where it's completely cost prohibitive to do production. So something has to give at some point.
Yeah, right. At some point, I think everyone's waiting to see when and how. Right. Before we get to another question, I'm just wondering if, Aymar, Jason, or Jolene, are any productions that you're able to move forward in any way without the insurance issue being resolved?
This is one of the main reasons why we're not recommending people shoot, because our communities are mostly Black and brown. They're disproportionately affected by COVID. Our productions are usually non-union and really, really scrappy in terms of resources. And on our guidelines, we underlined and bolded that you could be held liable and lose a lot of money if you shoot at this time. So yeah, just that it's a huge barrier.
Right. Okay.
We, like I said, we have one project that's archival that's able to move forward. We're even talking about doing some kind of sort of online workshop about archival filmmaking to bring that expertise into the space, since that's more viable right now. We have one project that's doing a little bit of just environmental shooting within the community that it's based. It's a partnership with Frontline. But all the interviews are being conducted, all the pre-interviews, it's in development right now, so all the pre-interviews are being conducted by Zoom. So that's where we're at. And then we have this new relationship with Hulu, which is the Hulu Kartemquin Accelerator. It's a first look deal with Hulu for 2 projects that are filmmakers of color who are alumni of our programs. And that's able to move forward, but both of those projects are in post-production. So they're really using this time to work on story and edit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wait, just let me just say this. In Chicago, we film, we do not shoot.
Right. That's right. An important distinction here. So an important question from Kyle Henry about funding and financing. I'm going to try and bring Kyle in here. Kyle, and I don't know how much people will be able to answer, but if people didn't know, the Tribeca Film Institute, which is a pretty big support organization for filmmakers, is closing down. and you know, not quite Sundance Institute level, but of course was important and supported a lot of filmmakers. And we had a partnership with them at the pitch at Industry Days, where winners of the pitch would go to the Tribeca Film Institute for meetings. And it's a really big support organization. And of course, funding crunches are affecting everyone. So Kyle, can you join
Sure.
us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
I guess to boil the question down even further, is there advocacy that we could be doing collectively in the city of Chicago? In this, by advocacy, I mean lobbying for greater support as private philanthropy contracts. Every university is being impacted by this. I have a sneaking suspicion that every single nonprofit will take a hit this year in philanthropic giving as all pivots towards COVID, rightfully so, healthcare, other kinds of issues. So is there anything we can be doing now, regionally, locally, making sure that we're sort of lobbying for support? And that could be financial, that could be, you know, NEA, NEH, you know, grant access, direct re-granting to the organizations that are here represented today, et cetera. Is that on the table anywhere?
I can speak to this a little bit, Kyle. Like, so we at Kartemquin have been participating in a few different sort of organizing efforts. One is an organizing effort that the NEA and Sundance are conducting around sort of regional advocacy. And this was work that was already happening pre-COVID, but it's really found a different sort of voice and energy in this moment where we're all coming together pretty regularly. Oh, sorry. Dog. So we're all coming together pretty regularly around this issue of advocacy. And there's even a Midwest group that Mimi and Anthony and other folks are involved in. And one of the things we're looking at is like Arts Midwest and advocating that entity that hasn't been as supportive of film to be more supportive of film in this moment, because they did receive money from NEA and that federal funds. There's also a sort of national group that Sundance is organizing that involves like the International Documentary Association, and that's really doing a lot of important sort of advocacy work in that vein. I mean, I think I'm really, you know, not only did TFI close, but yesterday I got an email that Vulcan Productions is closing. They've done a lot of impact support for documentary and provided a lot of important funding. I mean, I've just been kind of struck about these, like the consolidation of that filmmaker support work, because it is going to mean there's more scarcity, there's going to be fewer opportunities. How do we ensure that people aren't left behind, and that the work that we've done to date, you know, that we don't sort of lose ground? And it's hard because TFI was, I mean, for us, I know, a huge collaborator as well. And I think that those sort of like organizing efforts within the regions and the stuff that Sundance is doing nationally, it is focused on that. But there isn't money, you know, there isn't really money to support a lobbyist, you know. I mean, that's, and other industries have, like IATSE, I mean, other, you know, sort of larger parts of the industry, the not the independent industry, have funds to put towards lobbying, and we don't really have that right now, and that's where it's hardest felt, I think.
Thank you so much for your answer. And yeah, if there's anything individually, though, I found that lobbying collectively, it means also just numbers of people calling, emailing. So as you move further down the line, you know, I think feel free to reach out to the broader base to collectively in some way work for lobbying instead of hiring a professional. Thank you so much.
I want to just make a comment. I just want to say, on a government level, as far as support and that kind of thing is concerned, realize that a lot of the revenue that comes into the government comes from taxes on everyday things that happen every day. And the fact that a lot of things aren't happening on a daily basis is really putting a huge drain on both local and state resources. Just an enormous gain. For instance, DCASE, Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, our budget comes from the hotel occupancy tax. So you can imagine, after this extended period of time, where we are with our budget. So just think about all the gas people aren't buying, all the things that people aren't doing, and all that revenue that's not coming into the state or the city government right now. And know that their resources are going to be very much strained just to keep the lights on and first responders working and all that kind of thing. So I know that there are some efforts being made to provide some grants for arts, but I just know that the resources there on a governmental level are going to be extremely limited.
If I could get a little political, I just feel like I was just looking at the broad strokes of the city budget today, just before this call, randomly, and some of these issues are interconnected. Like the police budget in the city is $1.6 billion, and the arts budget is 35 million, right? At least that was the numbers last year, maybe 2 years ago. It's just like priorities, right? Like everyone's inside. Can we cut some other areas of the budget and actually give to parts of the budget that support the economy and the people of this city?
Yeah, I was going to do that. Like part of my job as the head of a nonprofit is to speak to all of our funders. We've been doing this quite often. The outlook is quite bleak, right? I heard a 6 to 8 year timeline for like the arts sector to stabilize and be back. So I think to the point of Kyle's main question about like the contraction of endowments, foundations, grant money, that's going to be real. And one thing that we're looking at in terms of balancing, what keeps us alive is to really start to push towards different streams of revenue and being very creative about building that infrastructure out. The other thing I'll add is on this one particular funder call, in terms of, I am really excited about this Sundance NEA thing, but it's quite big and quite national. And I think if we came out of this with an infrastructure for media arts to be able to lobby to the federal government, that would be very huge. Though it's going to be a hard time to lobby for money in the next 2 to 3 years, as Kwame just mentioned. But one thing that this one particular funder had suggested was, even on a hyper local basis, what she sees from her seat as a funder is that we're always good at asking for money individually to these foundations, but we're not good at kind of coming together as an arts block sector, not even just media arts or film, but even just like all the arts block in Aldermanic Ward, and coming together there to start to lobby to. And I think this connects to Aymar's point, like if there's more local coordination happening, and we can ask questions about the city's budget as a single voice. She was saying that is something that she doesn't often see, but feels like would be a very powerful kind of approach, because it starts to coalesce people around your economic kind of power, right? Like we are people that employ others, like we are job creators, and all of us, this arts block together represents, a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunities. So I think that was an interesting thing that I took away from that talk, and I just wanted to share that on the call.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the purposes, of course, of these meetings is not just for us to be, available to the community, but for us to be able to come together and for, action items within these organizations to be built out of it. So maybe we all have to follow up, and if there are others on the call who want to follow up with us, but to have a single sort of voice for such issues, would not be a bad thing. Some sort of coordinating effort between us all. So just to clarify something, Jessie Fairbanks is on the call. She works with Tribeca. She also is a programmer based in Chicago. And she was just clarifying that the Tribeca Film Institute may not be dead, but is maybe just suspended. I mean, I don't know, what I read said winding down, and like hopefully it'll be back. So hopefully it'll be back. Jesse, is there anything specific that you can add? I think I added your voice to the call.
About TFI?
Yeah.
Just that, you know, for the moment it is consolidating, and that it is going to be winding down by the end of the summer. We're still in the process of handing out grants that were pre-approved, so people that had already applied for some of those programs will still be able to access funds, and that it will be back.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. That is good to hear.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Do we have other questions? I mean, one question related to a question that came in was budgeting, and I think we haven't really mentioned it, and I'm wondering whether you guys are all thinking about budgeting in the pandemic and post-pandemic era, and how new protocols are going to be changing budgets, and how are you accounting for that, especially, you know, given the funding crunch that is likely to be the result of all this? Anyone want to take that one?
About how are we addressing the coming funding crunch?
And as in light of the fact that there's going to be increased costs associated with shooting and you know, with extra precautions, you know, an on-set coordinator, you know, specific to COVID, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been able to raise money for us as an organization, but that's only because we were starting from such a low amount to begin with that we're not really a huge budget line for most arch foundations. But we are being more aggressive about our revenue strategies, and kind of like Jason and Jolene were saying, having our own distribution platforms where we can sell directly to our artists, and leveraging our community connections to actually start pooling our programming and getting some more low budget programming happening. So a bunch of our artists have been doing their own live streams. Ricardo Gamboa that did Brujos for us has a monthly talk show called The Hood Wazi, where they interview aldermen about like local political issues. And we're looking at programs like that where we can open up our studio, have one person be in there solo, host a live stream, talk about local issues, do more live streaming. Podcasts potentially are an option. And yeah, owning our own distribution platforms, I think, is critical for generating revenue in the future.
Okay. Any other thoughts about budgeting, Jason? How are you going to deal with increased costs related to that?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, so, you know, just like Jolene and Aymar mentioned earlier, the constituents that we work with are folks who've been traditionally marginalized, working with much smaller budgets and have much less access to, you know, just large pools of money that can support whatever new costs are going to come through. So, you know, it's a balancing act, but we're really pushing towards learning how to, you know, monetize content, get things online, create new types of engagements for people that are virtual, that can also support the organization when like everything's contracting on the foundation side and costs are increasing on the production side. Like, you know, where do you go? Like, where do you go to find more places to ask for money? But that seems like a very difficult thing to do because all the funding is starting to shift towards immediate need, which makes perfect sense. So in that equation for us, the one place that we have control over and can think about developing during this time period, and I think film is, you know, quite amenable to being online. It's just it's a very different competitive space, and so we have to ramp up very quickly to learn about what that looks like. That's why we're investing a lot into our digital marketing team and really learning how to, like, every single dollar that we put towards our marketing budget needs to, like, you know, have and create impact. And so I think pressing on and learning more about these digital marketing tools that are available and are fairly cheap relative to like traditional marketing tactics is a really great way to bring your costs down to reach more people and specifically target audiences that care about and want to watch your content. And I think right now, because people are looking for things to do at home, I mean, it's a good time to learn how to segment your audiences digitally.
Yeah, that's a good pivot actually to distribution. There's a question here about posts and having, there's a lot of people who have projects that they're not sure what to do with, right? They're in post or they're finished even. And I guess you all can probably speak to this, and you're kind of speaking to this now in terms of digital distribution. Like, what the question, is, are online digital festivals, viable, or should we try to wait things out? What are you guys thinking about the new festival landscape, which right now is online? Maybe in a couple months it will be a hybrid model of online and some select live events. How are you navigating, and what do you tell filmmakers who are looking to get their work out there right now?
I mean, for me, I think it depends on, it's project specific, and it depends on the type of content. So like if you're working on a short or something like that, I think that an online digital platform is totally viable and a great option. I would also encourage you to continue to submit to the more traditional festivals as well, because then you're packaged in with their content once they pivot and decide to move online or whatever, but you're still getting that festival recognition attached, those laurels attached to your poster. So that's certainly, if you're looking at like a short or a web series or something like that, absolutely. If you're looking at, a more higher profile independent film, maybe with some stars in it or something, I would encourage you not to release that online at the moment. And just kind of hold off and wait and see if you have a sales agent, obviously, or try and get a sales agent to do that, because there's some great opportunities in international markets as well. But I think if you have a fiduciary responsibility to give a return on investment to your investors, you better think long and hard about how best to do that. But for now, I think the best thing would be to wait and see and try and get a sales agent to help you answer those questions.
I think too, like in a moment like this, people talk about this moment as shifting paradigms, like at the scale of world wars. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really great moment, despite kind of like the despair and trouble. It's a really great moment to think about existing models and whether they still make mm-hmm. sense. Part of what's happened is that I think for filmmakers who just finished a film, you should think about like there's a difference in power that you have now, because people are really hungry for content and trying to do that, so that it changes your negotiating kind of leverage and power in some of those distribution conversations. So you should really think about that, and also just never sign anything without asking a ton of questions. I heard recently there was a Dear Producer panel about film festivals, and I thought the conversation was really great, because they weren't just talking about how to replicate the model virtually. They were talking about whether the model makes sense and what should change and shift about the economics of film festivals, and whether they're actually supporting filmmakers or if they're not. And I think those kind of questions, to me, these like foundational, fundamental questions, and again, this kind of comes from Full Spectrum, thinking a lot about the equity of this industry, and so much of the inequity is built into the structures. So we're always thinking about the structural changes that can be achieved, but I think this moment right now gives us a ton of like outlets and different ways to rethink things. So Yeah, I just wanted to add that. And if you haven't listened to that Dear Producer panel about film festivals, it's a really great one.
Kwame, do you have to jump off before Jolene goes in there?
Yeah, I have to jump off, but I can come back. I just have to do this call, and then I can.
We'll be done in a few. So thanks so much for joining us, Kwame.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for all the hard work. We'll be calling your office soon for those permits.
Bye, Kwame.
Bye-bye.
So Jolene, because you've had to be making this decision on a couple Kartemquin
Well,
films.
I mean, I just wanted to say, I mean, Jason said it so eloquently, but I feel similarly energized by this need to just change and disrupt the paradigm as it exists. And I think, like, you all bringing us together in this way, and the sort of, I think, increased collaboration and conversations that are happening across our industry, locally, regionally, nationally, is going to help us push. I mean, to Jason's point about like the power dynamic, I feel like we haven't fully, I thought that was going to be the case too, because with so many films coming out this year. And I feel like it's not what we've seen exactly. You know, it's like, okay, people are going to be hungry for content. We have all of these really strong filmmakers, especially by emerging makers who are alumni of our programs. And it's been a struggle like this. I just feel like it's maybe more because the dust hasn't settled yet in terms of the sales marketplace, and people are scared and people are being motivated by fear. And because we haven't had this onslaught of, you know, interest and content that we feel really passionately about, and that's gotten great, you know, good reviews even in the midst of these challenging times. But I think, and I've, you know, on the flip side of that, it's like I see these sort of articles in the trades that get me really frustrated, where it's kind of talking to documentary filmmakers predominantly on the coasts, you know, working at a really high level, saying we've never been busier before. Like our phones are ringing off the hook, you know, from Netflix and these sort of larger streamers. And it's concerning to me that when you think about the issue of equity, it's like people are going, they're sort of scared and they're going to folks that they feel like, well, that's a sort of known quantity, and that people aren't getting as many chances that might be coming through our structures within Kartemquin. So I'm both energized by what Jason said, and then also like a little crestfallen because it's not, you know, we haven't seen that yet, but I'm hopeful that that's going to come.
Jolene, the energy crestfall is like what I go through like 7 times a day. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should be wrapping up. I feel like, you know, as representative of a 56-year-old film festival, I'm a bit, you know, well, I don't know. We have to obviously work with filmmakers in the current moment, but paradigm changing right now is also really hard because we're just all hampered by, you know, everything right now. So, but yeah, hopefully we can move forward based on all this. So for everyone who's still there, remember in 2 weeks, we will be back with another town hall and having SAG and IATSE on board, post even more, you know, information about getting back into production, I think will be important. We can get into some nitty-gritty details. I know there's lots of questions about like, what is a COVID coordinator going to do? How much are they going to cost? How are we going to, you know, how are these people going to be determined? All that stuff is really yet to be worked out, but things are moving fast. So in 2 weeks, we might have some more production related answers on everything. So thanks again to Angie Gaffney for helping support, who's invisible right now, but she's listening and helping. Thanks to our panelists, Mary, Aymar, Jason, Jolene, and Kwame, who had to go back to work. Good luck, stay safe, stay sane. What else can we say, right? Yeah. Let's keep talking. We also have to keep talking and keep the conversation going. Last time we had kind of some action items, which we're still working on. This idea of, you know, arts organizations joining together, lobbying. Kartemquin has a great history of this within the documentary community. Maybe we can make it happen with just the entertainment community in Chicago. So, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody.